Good morning, and welcome to today's seminar. My name is Jim Standridge. I'm the business process owner for RegAF military separations here at AFPC. We also have Dr. Jennifer Stengel with us from the Medical Retention Standards branch. She will be briefing a couple of portions of this morning. Before we really get started, I just wanted to go over a couple of things. Obviously, by now, a lot of you have probably seen the Air Force Times article, and you've probably seen a lot of articles over the last few months. So there's the possibility that there's a perception out there that implementing this policy means the Air Force is going to be separating a lot of people, hundreds, even thousands of people, for not being deployable for 12, or for being non-deployable for 12 or more consecutive months. And it's really not true. The DoD instruction that established this policy did not establish non-deployability as a separation reason. The intent is not to drive separations, but instead to drive service members to be deployable in order to meet our wartime missions. As such, the reality is that we likely won't see very many separations as a result of this policy implementation, and not directly tied to this policy. But we'll cover some of those points as we go further through the brief. Today, we're going to cover the general guidance of the OSD policy and how the Air Force is implementing it. We will cover the main points, but I recommend that you review the DoD Instruction 1332.45, Retention Determination for Non-Deployable Service Members, and especially the Retention of Non-Deployable Airmen Personnel Services Delivery Guide that was just public yesterday. The PSDG was sent to the MPFs on secure MyPERS last Thursday, and again was made public yesterday. This briefing is geared toward regular Air Force members. However, if we have any Guard or Reserve individuals listening, your procedures are going to be pretty much the same. We're going to start with some general guidance. First and foremost, all service members are expected to be deployable. When airmen can't deploy, it puts an extra burden on those who can. When a member is non-deployable for 12 or more consecutive months, they will be evaluated for retention. The key term here is evaluated, which we will discuss further as we go through the brief. And again, a key implication is that the DoD instruction is a retention policy, not a separation policy. Okay, now we'll go through a little background on the OSD policy. The DoD instruction was published at the end of last July and went into effect on 1 October 2018. The reason for the delay in getting out Air Force policy implementation is that we wanted to make sure we thoroughly understood the intent so that we could implement the guidance correctly. As mentioned on the previous slide, the policy requires service members who have been non-deployable for 12 or more consecutive months to be evaluated for retention. This includes, if they have a medical reason, they should be entered into the disability evaluation system. If they have an administrative reason for non-deployability, is the underlying cause or reason for discharge. The Service Secretary has the authority to retain these members when it's determined to be in the best interest of the service. We'll go into how this retention determination works for the Air Force in the coming slides. One category of personnel that are excluded from this are those females who are pregnant or in the postpartum period. The Secretary can also retain combat wounded members if the member requests retention. Eligible combat wounded members are those who have been evaluated through the DES and whose reason for non-deployability is a direct result of their combat wounds. The service can also request the Secretary of Defense approval to exempt specified positions. At this point, the Air Force is still working on that list of potential positions, but would likely include things such as missile officers, potentially remote piloted positions, in which members wouldn't ordinarily be required to forward deploy. One further note on the previous slide. Finally, if the service member is within 3 years of being eligible for retirement, they may also be retained in order to reach retirement. Now let's focus on the Air Force policy and procedures. As stated, an airman non-deployable for 12 or more consecutive months must be evaluated for retention. If the underlying reason is medical, they will be evaluated for referral into the DES process. If the underlying cause is administrative and qualifies under a pre-existing basis for separation, as an example, if there's a valid administrative basis for separation, the airman will be processed for discharge. Airman's non-deployable status is not, in and of itself, a basis for separation. As previously stated, the DoD instruction didn't establish non-deployability as a basis for separation.
And this is Dr. Jennifer Stengel. So airmen with 12 months of continuous profiling for the same condition require evaluation to be done by the Local Availability Working Group, also known as the DAWG. They are going to make potential referral to Air Force medical retention standards. Medical retention standards may then place an airman on a limited assignment limitation code due to this condition. However, these airmen are deployable with waiver. Airmen who have been returned to duty with or without an assignment limitation code may not be administratively separated based solely on the same condition. However, airmen with conditions that are not eligible for DES processing, such as alcohol use disorder, may have profile limitations for greater than 12 months. These airmen remain subject to their commander's determination for retention as per AFI 363208. SAF-MR is the final approval authority for all retention determination requests, with the exception of those who are combat wounded, and that wound is the cause of their non-deployability.
All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about the procedures. AFPC will be providing monthly rosters identifying those airmen who meet the non-deployable criteria and require evaluation. For regular Air Force, at any given time, we may have over 25,000 airmen who have been non-deployable for 12 or more months. However, the vast majority of these airmen are in statuses that are exempt from being included as requiring evaluation for retention. Some examples of those include airmen in training status, in a transient status, or airmen already undergoing administrative separation. There are other categories of individuals that the Secretary of the Air Force has exempted, which you will see on a later slide. When all of the exempted categories are removed, it would currently leave us with approximately 500 airmen that would potentially require retention determination. These include those enrolled in the DES with medical conditions that limit full duty and unable to carry a firearm. Of those, the majority are already in the DES process, so will require no action from the commander. These approximately 500 will be the airmen included on the rosters that are sent to the bases. For RegAF, the rosters will be sent via the Retrieval Applications Web, or RAW, that MPFs are familiar with. As per normal, the bases will only see those airmen who are assigned to them. We anticipate the first rosters to go out approximately the 6th or 7th of March. The rosters will provide information on who you and the applicable commander are seeing, categories of airmen who are on the rosters, and categories who are not. The rosters will be split by those that require some type of action and those who are just for commander situational awareness. Since the numbers are small, some MPFs may not have anybody on their roster, or at most just a few people. And since the actual numbers of airmen requiring a retention review will be even smaller, most commanders shouldn't have any action to take. Once MPFs receive the rosters, they will take action to notify the applicable commanders and provide information to the medical treatment facility. Commanders will review their airmen who have been identified for retention action. If there is a medical basis, the local DAWG will evaluate the member for referral into the DES. If there is an administrative basis, the airman will be evaluated for administrative separation by their commander. The types of information that are going to be included on the roster will be things such as the deployment availability codes, assignment availability codes, length of time that the airman's been coded for the specific code. We're also going to be including things like their total creditable service, ETS, a projected eligible for retirement date for any of those people who might be set in that 17 to 20 year window. And we would ask that if the MPFs have some specific types of information that they would like to include, at the end of this, when you're typing in your questions, you can also type in, hey, we would like to see this on the roster.
Now, to go over how this process falls in within the disability evaluation system, all Air Force military treatment facilities utilize the dog to oversee medical readiness and profile management. The dog continuously monitors the application and duration of medical profiles and is responsible for determining when an airman's medical condition warrants referral to Air Force medical retention standards at AFPC. Timing for referral to medical retention standards is unique to each airman, as it is based on their condition and its response to treatment. Referral may occur within a month or so of diagnosis or greater than a year after diagnosis if the member's condition has not reached some degree of stability or predictability. However, at 12 months of continuous profiling for the same condition, the dog will formally review an airman's case. Airmen referred to medical retention standards are evaluated for retention based on their AFSC rank, grade, and time in service in a manner in line with the Physical Evaluation Board. Approximately 55% of new conditions submitted to medical retention standards will be referred on into the Physical Evaluation Board. Once referred to the Physical Evaluation Board, about 95% of airmen will be medically separated or retired, and about 5% will be returned to duty. Airmen who have been evaluated and returned to duty by either medical retention standards or the Physical Evaluation Board may or may not be assigned an assignment limitation code. Airmen with assignment limitation codes are reviewed annually by medical retention standards and can be referred to the Physical Evaluation Board at any time if their condition worsens. These airmen may not be administratively separated based solely on the same condition. However, airmen with conditions that are not eligible for DES processing may be administratively separated and are subject to commander's option for retention per AFI 363208 and 363206.
Now we'll cover the retention determination process. We've mentioned several times already the requirement for an airman to be evaluated for retention, or a retention determination must be made. The basics are as follows. If the airman has been evaluated by the DES and returned to duty, then in effect the retention determination has been made and no further action is required. The airman is retained. If the airman has been evaluated for separation, but the underlying reason causing the non-deployability doesn't provide a basis for discharge, then the retention determination has been made and no further action is required. The airman is retained. A retention determination request is required and will be processed for either of the following. When the airman is evaluated for separation and an underlying basis does exist for discharge, but the command chain believes there are strong justifiable reasons the airman should be retained, then the retention determination is required. When a combat wounded airman found unfit by DES desires to remain on duty, this request will be processed to the Secretary of the Air Force, as the DoD instruction provides that only the Secretary of the Air Force can approve or disapprove one of those requests. The bottom line is that the need for processing a retention determination request should be a very rare occurrence. The retention determination process is outlined in detail in the PSDG, but following are some highlights. Enlisted airmen with less than 16 years of service can have their request disapproved at the wing commander level. There is no appeal of the disapproval. Enlisted airmen with over 16 years, those who would normally be considered lengthy service eligible, and all officer requests are processed through the show cause authority. If the show cause authority disapproves, there is no appeal. The Secretary of the Air Force has delegated final decision authority on these requests, basically final approval authority, to the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force Manpower and Reserve Affairs, or the SAF-MR. All retention determination requests, approved or disapproved, will be forwarded to AFPC DP2 STM, which is basically the separations branch, for tracking and/or processing to the SAF-MR for action. If the retention request is approved, the DOS is established as either the current ETS DOS for enlisted or up to 3 years from the approval date for officers. Earlier we mentioned that there were other approved exempted categories. This slide shows other categories that the Secretary of the Air Force has approved for exclusion. As previously stated, the DoD instruction does not establish a separation basis specifically for not being deployable. Any administrative separation will be based on the underlying cause and in accordance with Air Force separation policy guidance. Airmen who have been through the DES and returned to duty can't be considered for administrative separation based solely on the medical condition considered in their DES evaluation. If there is an underlying basis and admin discharge is initiated, if the airman is retirement eligible, he or she may apply for retirement in lieu of discharge. All right, next, we put together just a small handful of questions and answers. I will go through, and this may give you some thought, may answer a couple of things that you've already wanted to ask or stimulate some further questions. If an airman has not been deployable for 12 months or longer, does this mean they will automatically be separated? The answer is no. Airmen non-deployable for more than 12 months will be evaluated for retention based on the underlying cause making them non-deployable. What will retention decisions be based on? Among other things, and most importantly, an airman's ability to perform duties commensurate with their office, rank, or skill level and in the best interest of the Air Force. Who is the decision authority for retention? The Secretary of the Air Force has delegated final decision authority to the SAF-MR, with one caveat. Those combat wounded airmen who have been through the DES and request to be retained, the Secretary of the Air Force herself will make that decision. When is a retention determination request required? The answer is when an underlying basis exists for administrative separation, but the airman's chain of command is disinclined to pursue discharge, or when by a combat wounded airman found unfit by the DES, whose non-deployability is the direct result of the combat wounds. And finally, when will the first rosters be sent to the bases? The first rosters are planned to go out approximately the 6th or the 7th of March. It should be no later than the 7th, but we may try to get them out just a little earlier. As you've been able to see from this briefing, there are a number of offices who have a role in the implementation of this policy. If you have questions, you can call the contact center here AFPC, and they may be able to answer some of the more simple questions. But if you have further questions, you'll see on this slide a full list of points of contact for the various aspects of this policy. This list is also contained in the PSDG. Thank you for your time and attention today. Now we will open it up for questions.
So I see the question about referred DS cases, 95% discharge. That is an accurate statement. I believe the confusion is that the RILO portion, or the part, the pre-DES, you might call it, where it is the cases are referred to medical retention standards, that return to duty rate is in the, or referral into the DES is 55%. So once they get past medical retention standards, the return to duty rate is less than 5% generally.
Okay, please type your questions in the chat area. We'll do our best to answer as many as we can live. Thank you.
Okay, on the question, where is the PSDG found? It's out on MyPERS. It went out secure to the MPFs last Thursday, and it was made public yesterday. So you should be able to go in. You can go to the separations page, and from there will be a link to the various PSD guides, and you will find the non-deploy retention PSD guide there.
So for the question about the specific office within the MDG, you should provide your roster. So generally that would go through the MISME. And if you need assistance with that, I would recommend contacting the SGP at your local MTF, who should be able to contact you or point you in the right direction. And our next question. So if a member has gone through a medical board previously and is now coded, just 1 second, sorry. It is now coded to where they can only deploy to locations with medical facilities. Will they fall under this? No, a retention decision has essentially been made, and you are safe. You do not fall into this. So you have a C code is what I'm assuming that means, or the question is about, and you do not fall into this category.